Good day to you from Anagalactic on the first day of September in 2025 from Chico, California. You may notice if you have seen any of my prior videos that this is an odd angle. Currently, I'm forced to use my phone to make these brief presentations while the internet is down for the computer. But I thought it was time to talk about philosophy. Philosophy is kind of a lost art, you might say. But it certainly hasn't disappeared off of the scene of human society or wherever we're at, wherever our culture is, wherever we're at in our current stage of life. You do have to put yourself in some kind of context in order to discuss why would you be talking about philosophy? What is it? As part of the attraction of the topic, it's hard to decide what is philosophy, but it's essentially a view of life. But then life has compartments, so which part of life? So I like to begin any topic such as philosophy with a definition of the word. It's one approach. I know it sounds tedious, but to have a definition of the word philosophy would help if you're going to be talking about philosophy. What do you mean by that? So to get a definition is rather to get towards whatever answers you may be seeking by communicating philosophy. I have read books that would be called books on philosophy or philosophical books. But what is in them? It could be a lot, and that's the attraction. It's rather like science itself, where you could be talking about biology, or you could be talking about astronomy or chemistry or pure logic. That's part of science, part of the abstract sciences. But when you're talking about philosophy, you really need to be more specific. Philosophy about what? A philosophical point of view, I would say, is considered to be more subjective. I believe in a rigorous definitional approach, anyone would concede that science has very strict rules. Compared to what? Compared with philosophy. Philosophy allows more scope, but it's more of a clear division, I believe. In other words, it's possible to state more clearly what is the difference between science and philosophy. Do they have anything in common? The answer to that is a resounding yes. They do very much have something in common. In fact, from one approach, it might be difficult to distinguish between philosophy and science. They do overlap. There is such a thing as a natural philosophy. That used to be essentially the term used for science. The word science was invented, I believe, in the 19th century. The word itself, science, in context. But philosophy is more broad-based because it allows more. And the way I prefer to phrase that is it embraces the structural logic of the universe rather than the measurable. Science deals extraordinarily acutely with measurements because it contributes to the scientific method. And all that is well known, but I bring it up now because in philosophy the rules shift, but they don't shift away from science. In other words, philosophy could be said to comprise anything and everything that's in science, because anything that's in science, being provable, would be a valid subject for philosophy. And that's where we're at, essentially. Certainly in my series, going over 1,000 videos now, this presentation on philosophy is to introduce something specific, because when you're talking about philosophy, you're not being specific enough to be understood. Philosophy of what? In this case, the philosophy that overlaps science. In other words, it could be introspective. What is science? How do you define it? Well, that perforce invokes a philosophical response. because science can't prove itself. I think we're all aware of that, but that is a worthy note to bring up, is that science does not have a clear goal. It it works, so there's something to it. I don't see any possibility of disagreement that science is certainly good. And as with anything human, it could be abused, but essentially it's good. But when you try to define what it's for, you find out that essentially it's rather a girdle sort of a situation. Can a system prove itself? Not in the case of purpose. To get purpose, you'd have to go outside the system that you're trying to describe. In this case, science. What is it for? There is no way to answer that without becoming philosophical in the strict sense, that you're going to have to go outside of science to answer that. The reason for that is purpose is a structured concept. When you say purpose, you're not really saying one thing. You're saying two things in relation. And that's something we're still getting used to. In the 20th century, we learned that the universe prefers this form of logic. It's called superposition. And superposition is a slightly different form of logic. In this case, I would say well brought out in the relationship between philosophy and science. Now, on the philosophical side, you are allowed to use religion. You can say anything on the philosophical side. You can quote Tolkien, you can quote George Lucas, you can quote 1984, you can do anything you want on the philosophical side to make your case. In science, you cannot do that. That's a huge difference, because only one of those two can address purpose. And why? What do we mean by purpose? A goal. Well, in this case, because it's so open-ended, we're not sure what the goal is. Some people think it's space travel, and I believe that's quite a capturing notion, because it looks like if man as a group, just the race of man on Earth for whatever 10,000 years, of written records anyway, what are we doing? Well, it looks like we're going into outer space. So even Star Wars people, which I think is childish, Dow, Dow, Dow in outer space, we're going to be firing guns in outer space. Well, of course, there's a war going on that's cosmic. So once we get to the stars, we're going to fight because we'll find evil there. Most often, what we find is we find ourselves there. Because should man escape to the stars? I believe that is debatable. Well, that's what happens in philosophy. In science, you really don't have debatable. You don't have debatability in the same way in science. In science, you have to prove what you say. It will get fuzzy, of course, at the edges when you're trying to push the limit. But in philosophy, we're doing the same thing. We're making the same effort. But in science, we tend to think that we have limited goals, like you discover electricity. Well, that's pretty good feedback from the universe. It's probably a good idea that you discovered electricity. It certainly helps to know what that is and use it. So now we're capable of getting into outer space. Does that have a philosophical connotation? I should have to say it does. Are we going to the stars? Now, the stars do include the planets, according to the most ancient view of little glowing things in the sky. Could be a moving star, in which case it's not a star, it's a planet. But those were, at one time, called stars. So there are stars, even in our solar system, it's just they're not luminous, so they're not really stars. Well, are we going to the stars by going to Mars? I think it's tempting to believe yes, but there's a huge objection to that. In order to get to the stars, you have to break light speed. There would be no other way. We're so, or you would have to extend the life of the human being just to get there. God knows what you'll find. You'd better have the Starship Enterprise. I really think that was a gripping theme. That the Starship Enterprise was exploring the universe, looking for new lives, new forms of life, and new civilizations. Gee, I think I practically quoted it. But what I was talking about before beginning this particular video was the Addams Family. Because it's been occurring to me lately, now that October is approaching, and I take Halloween to be the very most important holiday of the year, is Halloween. Because you get to change identity, and you also get to explore in new directions. Like maybe your family is very much like the Addams Family, and that's why we love the Addams Family, who are a bunch of weirdos. But you see, what you're doing is you're pushing a limit to try to explore to see who you are, what you are, and that's philosophy. So as far as the human race goes, are we going to the stars? I think that's a very reasonable question. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, it looks like that was an automatic reaction of the entire human race. I didn't really hear any dissenting voices. There's always a few. It's like you're wasting your time looking. You're never going to find them. But we looked anyway. We're still looking. In fact, every now and then you hear a report. We just noticed a very strange signal. And we're wondering, maybe we should look at this again. Because you're doing philosophy. You're practicing philosophy the reason we have philosophy is to do that. So in science, to try to define what science is doing, I would have to say that at the top of the list, what it looks like science is doing is attempting to reach the stars. Because there's no reason to go to the planets. Not yet. And this is in the back of the mind now. I was raised on science fiction. I know everything the X generation knows and about a million times more. I'm 70 years old. That's the only reason I say that, is to emphasize I've been thinking about this a goodly long time. And I've seen the shift in emphasis on meaning. It's like, what is the meaning of life? It's so cliche. Well, it's been made into a parody of a movie well done by Monty Python, The Meaning of Life. And then The Life of Brian, but the one that just was so classic, it makes up for the other two, was the immortal Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That movie is classic. The way it ended was kind of, they ran out of time. They were at a low budget. So they didn't know how to end the movie. So they just took it apart and filmed taking apart the movie. Well, only Monty Python could get away with that because that was a ruiner. But if you disregard the very ending, how do you end a movie anyway? That's easy for me to say, like when I'm pointing the finger, like, oh, you should have put in a good ending, you cruds. Doesn't matter how the movie ended. This is the beginning and the middle. That's what you need from that movie. The ending is, when you get up to leave, so who cares? All right, so there's our venture into the rudiments of philosophy, which goes quite a bit deeper. Well, see, this is another purpose of philosophy, is so men can get together and share their minds in an open forum. Why? So we can learn from each other. We're not coming together to bat each other over the head. And so, there could be little rules like no politics. No. You're talking about a certain kind of man that's immune to that. You can talk about anything you want. But the only rules are if you like come across like you're some kook bag religious person and you're just going to start thumping on your Rantia Bible, which is well named you Rantia. Anyway, there's a million of these, and you don't want that. So you do have to have well-grounded men in your group. Well, try to find that. The Congress is mostly LDS. So obviously there's not a very accurate sifting process going on. You have Mormons who basically pass the bills of this country. Why are they all Mormons? You got to ask. And so you don't want that. You don't want someone like that. Well, where do you find these men? Everyone is either Republican or Democrat. Well, already you don't want those. If you're in politics, you're not accurate. You're not good enough. You can't sit with us. We don't want you. That's what'll come out in a philosophical debate. It's weeding out the infidels. If it's controlled in some way, like, you have special agents in these meetings just taking notes, a video, there's drones, everything, there's a stenographer. It's like a court case. And we come together, we drink some brandy, we smoke some weed. Some of us are on acid. And we just start talking about philosophy because that's how you guide the fucking nation. And it's televised and everybody sees it. These are your decision makers. And there's call-ins, there's like ticker tapes, there's people with webcams, Here's a housewife in Illinois who would like to ask you a question about your policy. And it's like, we don't want any of you. We don't want you. You're lost. So, no politics. But you see, you don't ever want to have a restraint on freedom of speech. So these are extraordinary men. And when you're talking about philosophy, you're talking about the man. You're talking about a man. Somebody with flesh and blood is a philosopher. Scientists are machines. Scientists have to be machine-like. They're not quite human. And I am part Vulcan. I mean, that have to be Vulcan. No emotion. No emotion. You can't. Or it interferes with the rational logic system. Because now you're biased if you're emotional. You can't help it. That's what emotion does. It makes you biased. So if you feel real strongly about your church or your party, we simply will weed you out. You will not be part of our process. Because this is serious. This is for all humanity. This is how things are actually done on Earth. Is some very, very wise men get together and philosophize. What is science? What are we doing? Is morality being upheld? Are the people happy? Just start looking into things. What's going on here? Well, that's not how the world is run. That's why we have philosophy. Is to equate them. How do you deal with the irrational side of life? You will have a philosophy. I have a much better word than that for you, darling. A philosopher is like a rock. It's just common. There's just rocks everywhere. A philosopher is a commoner. He's a cut above. He's okay, but he's still common. No, there's a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy of intelligence. Only it has to be pure. Well, where are you going to find that? That would be called wisdom. And where is wisdom to be found? The depths say I have it not. The mountains say, well, you can add to the list. You're going to have a tough time finding that. We have to, because that's the way it's meant to be. Wise men getting together and philosophizing openly, without any chance of subterfuge. Nobody is trying to pull their agenda. We're simply talking about reality the way it must be addressed. That has never been done in the history of mankind, except in the privacy of a mansion with a hearth, lots of brandy, lots of marijuana, anything you want or need, forever. I mean, as long as it takes to get the job done, which is forever. It's for the future of the planet. It's for the future of the race. Well, I think you know who the first delegate to that I'd nominate. Myself. So that's the real reason I produce these videos, and that's 21 minutes. That's enough. I just want you all to know I'm still alive. We have some fun ahead, some real fun, because we're going all the way. What I was going to say, and I'm going to close with this remark on philosophy, that philosophy is common, and technically speaking, we're always trying to raise the bar, we're trying to push the envelope, we're trying to be better men, always trying to be better than anything we could have hoped for or imagined in the past. We're absolute realists because this is reality. You have to get it right. And it has to be done right. And it can only be by the philosophizing of wise men. And no, I would not be the first or even the first nominated delegate to that group. You know why? It would be infiltrated. To the degree that it were effective, it would be infiltrated with evil. If it's on the sideline, evil might not bother with it. But if it gets any mainline attention, whatever it is, it will be infiltrated. And there's no way around this parasitism. Whatever you design that might follow my little blueprint that I suggest for a council of wise men, with access to anything they want or need. So they're privileged humans, because that's what it takes. They have to lead a normal life in order to confront what is normal life. Well, you better be living it already. So you'll never do it. We have to. Well, we can't. Well, we're going to try anyway. You're going to fail. Good. Then we'll fail. But we're going to try. We're going to get through this. And so you don't need philosophy, you need religion. And it's not a question. Like, here's your buffet menu. Would you like religion? You already have religion. And you always will. It's only a question of if you grow up to use it right. And that's true bar mitzvah, is when you learn what is religion. And you must learn it, or you're not a man. And you have no heart, and you're not quite human. You will have religion. And then, how do you define religion? That'll be in the next video. How do you define religion? The guiding force of human life is not science. It's not logic. Logic is involved. I just told you how logic is involved. Is logic engaged? Not enough. Not enough to tip the balance. Not enough to make a difference. David Bohm had to face it. He wasn't alone. All the prophets faced it. Human life. Not the science. The scientist. I'm a scientist. And I'm an extraordinarily religious man. And I have been since the age of 17. And now you're going to get it. Because I earned this. This is to help you. It's not to challenge you. You will challenge yourself. But I'm going to tell you what is true religion. So that you know. So that you'll know what you're talking about. even to yourself, when you use the word religion. That's 25 minutes. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.